Hi everybody, welcome to Shivers. We are just fresh out of the theater seeing The Woman in the Yard. So they even gave us a little pin, which is pretty cool. But I had to hop on here and do a pretty quick review because I have a lot of thoughts on this movie and don't want to forget any of them. I also want to start this out by saying that this movie highly exceeded my expectations. So if you don't want any spoilers, just fast forward all the way to the end for the actual score. But otherwise, here we go with the actual review. So this movie is a Blumhouse movie. They had a budget of $12 million and really only a 6-person cast. They have Mom Ramona, who was our main character. We have our deceased father, who doesn't even have a name. We have son Taylor, daughter Annie, and then we have the woman in the yard. So that's only 5 people. So really the whole premise of this story kicks off right from the get-go. The mother and father, Ramona and this dead dad, got into a fatal car accident. It's unclear how long ago, but all of the actual funeral flowers are dying in their foyer. The whole point of this house that we're in for the entirety of this movie is that this is a house that's a fixer-upper. The father sort of convinced the mother to move there and give it an opportunity, give it a shot. They moved from the city, you can only assume New York City. And Mom Ramona is an artist. So we see them later on in the movie having this conversation right before they get into the car accident where she wants to go back. She says, you know, my passions don't really matter out here because nobody cares about art out here and we're really only here for you. And he basically rebuttals and he's like, well, we're not moving again. So what are you going to do about it? So she takes the keys and starts to drive home. He's in the passenger seat right at the last moment. And in this rearview mirror, we see this almost like demon, I guess you can say. But it's really this manifestation of anger from Ramona. So she looks back into the rearview mirror, she looks forward, and they get in a head-on collision. We don't find out all those details until about halfway through the movie. So now in her painting studio, she has painted this woman that she saw in the mirror before her husband passed away. She is injured with what seems like an ACL tear, which to me is probably the scariest part of the movie. You know, I guess you could say, celebrated my 11th anniversary of my ACL surgery. And so seeing the actual cast and seeing the supports, at one point she falls on her knee and the pain of that, I firsthand know is just terrible. So, you know, we already have that element of injury for her. So she's very reliant on her kids to kind of help her out. She is kind of grieving, moping, sulking away in her bed, watching video after video after video of her husband from back in the day. So just really stuck in this hole of grief at the cost of the livelihood of her children, who now go downstairs and there's no power on. She's watched the video so many times on her phone that now she can't even call the people to turn the power back on, let alone call the cops when they look outside and there is said woman in their yard. So just like you've seen on the commercials, the woman in the yard is just this lady sitting there with this very old funeral garb on. You know, it's very traditional back in the day for the woman, the widow, to be wearing this black veil at her partner's funeral. So right off the bat, we already know that we're having a movie that's very relevant to grief and the actual cycle of grief. So they do what I would consider a really fantastic job of almost taking you through the layers of grief in such a subliminal way. You know, we start out with her really just putting all of that pressure on her children and relying on the people around her to help. We then see her start to pick up some of these like ignorant habits of just like, don't look at her, don't do any of that, just push her away. And then we lean into this anger. So anger is really where she stays for a good majority of the film. And to be able to do that in a way that's just so subtle to the actual grief piece of it, I think is just, it's a masterclass in how to do that in a movie sense. So as the story goes on, she confronts this woman in the yard. She has already painted her, has already seen her in the rearview mirror. So we already, from an audience perspective, kind of know that she knows who this woman is, but then she just keeps lying to her kids. So Taylor, who is this, I would assume probably like 14, 15-year-old, he sneaks out of the house and tries to confront this woman. And she kind of says, like, your mother isn't telling you the whole truth, so maybe start with her before you pull a gun on me. So he goes back inside, confronts his mother, and he's like, who is she? You said you didn't know who she was. Now she's talking to us, and you said she didn't have anything to say. So where's the truth? So that's when we get the full truth that she was the one who was actually driving the car. And that's pretty much it that she tells her son. So she says, we assume, she says that this woman is sort of comeuppance in a sense. So it's very unclear from the child-adult perspective how much she's actually revealing to her own children, but all of the imagery that we're getting throughout this movie is very representative of now it's time to dive into our grief, dive into our shadows. All of the lights have to go out. The power doesn't work anyway because she can't call the company. So as the day gets progressively closer to night, there's a lot of fears of what this woman will do. She has almost these like ghostly powers where she can reach through as a shadow into the actual house, move things around, pick up stuff. So they close all the blinds, which again is almost this idea of like shutting out reality. And then they find themselves up in the attic. So now it's officially nighttime. They're in the attic. It doesn't really seem like there's any rules anymore. You know, what I've always harped on the idea that we got to have a good story and we got to have rules that we follow. So having her sit outside, being able to only really come in through the windows when you have this sunlight reflection, again, we can only assume from a rule perspective that now it's nighttime, anything goes. So, you know, she's been creeping closer and closer to the house. It's almost like nightfall ensues. Now she's inside. Because again, it's the darkness. So now there is no escape from the darkness. You have to face your shadow. So our mom, Ramona, now sees this woman in the attic and she just basically consumes Annie, the youngest girl, the daughter. So now Ramona is running through the house trying to find Annie, and she sees this portal through her husband's safe. She walks through this portal, and it's the video that she's been watching on her phone over and over, but in real life. So her husband's in bed in front of her, all of their pictures are on the wall, but everything is opposite. So everything is very much a reflection of what she's going through, what she's doing, which is just phenomenal. It's so good. It's so good. So she goes through all of this, realizes it's not real by all of the backwards words and things like that. And then she gets put into the perspective of this woman in the yard. So she wakes up and she has a veil over her. She's looking at her own house. She's watching herself come out of the house. So she's replaying almost that entire day from the woman in the yard's perspective. So we get to this final climax, and it is the actual woman in the yard versus Ramona. And the woman in the yard is saying, you know, you brought me here. You essentially summoned me. It's this be careful what you wish for moment. And Ramona's like, no, you know, I asked you for strength. And so they flash back every morning. She's like, just give me strength. Just give me strength. Just give me strength. Never strength for what? So this woman in the yard says, yeah, you've been asking me for strength, but to kill yourself, not to get up and have a good day. So we have this very real, very sad moment where Ramona is holding the gun that belonged to her husband to essentially try to kill this woman, and has this, I guess you can say, just reflective moment for herself. And this woman says, you can try to shoot me, but you're just going to be shooting yourself. So let me give you that strength. So she sits her down in the chair that the woman in the yard's been sitting in all day long, puts the gun under her chin, and tries to help her make that decision and do that thing. So she's already told her kids to go run down the road and try to get to the neighbors to see if we can call somebody, which she prevented all day long because she just wanted to keep them inside, you know, keep them close. There's nothing going on outside. Ignorance is bliss. Just stay here. We'll be fine. We'll be safe. So now she finally lets them go down the road. We don't see for a couple of seconds what her decision is. Then her kids come back and they run into her as she's leaving the garage where she is. So it's really this very heartfelt, very tearjerker moment of, you know, she made the she made the decision. She truly faced her shadow, faced all of that darkness to come out this other side and choose to be here with her kids. So I really think that this movie is just such a wonderful reflection of the battle with grief, the battle with loneliness, the battle with your demons in general. And again, just the need and force to actually face them. You know, nothing changes if nothing changes. And so you have to do some of that shadow work. You have to face yourself and the voices that are in your head sometimes too, especially that are brought on by grief. You got to move through it. So all of that being said, this movie is very reflective of Talk to Me. I get the same vibe. I get the same feeling. It is a really heavy story that is turned out into just this wonderful horror movie. And I think both of those movies really blew my expectations away. So, you know, this is not just a casual Saturday watch. We're in it to kind of learn something and have that empathy from a character development perspective. So, all of that to be said, here's the actual review. So for the story itself, I would give it a 4 out of 5. Again, the only reason why I wouldn't give it a 5 out of 5 is because I would have liked to see this just slightly more on like the, all right, kids, get out of here. Like, let's go try to get help. I understand that that's not really, again, reflective of people's actual journey. So I have to give it a little bit of grace. Even like a 4.5, I would give it, but we'll just stick with 4 out of 5. For originality, I would give it 4 out of 5. We've had a lot of movies, especially drama movies, that are grief centered, especially around losing a partner. I think just for the sake of it being so similar in terms of the grief themes to Talk to Me, and that it was just so easy to kind of compare the two of them, I would give that a 4. You know, again, that's the only reason why I wouldn't give it a 5. In terms of acting, I would give it a 5 out of 5. Everybody did their job. Even for Annie being this little girl, I'm very picky with kids in horror movies because I think a lot of times their acting can make it or break it. You know, look at Imaginary, for example, just a really crappy movie and a terrible, terrible kid. Same thing for Terrifier 3, just you stupid kids. But, you know, this little girl, Annie, did a really great job. She did her job. And so acting is 5 out of 5. Production, I would give it a 4 out of 5. I would like to see more flashbacks. I would like to see a little bit more change of setting. You know, we do spend the entire movie at the house. So just something a little bit different I would like to see, especially with that kind of budget. And then for scares, I would give it about a 3.5 out of 5. Again, the scariness comes from the story, the realism of the story, the realism of these things that we face on a day-to-day basis. So in terms of jump scares, there's a couple, especially with the woman in the yard herself. But after kind of figuring out what she is, it doesn't really make it scary anymore. It's just, you're more so cheering on the mom to face that and move forward. So all that together, we get a 4 out of 5. This is a really good movie. I would really honestly recommend it. And I don't want my review to blow it out of the water so that it's like, oh my God, this is the best thing ever. I just think it's a really great take on grief, on talks of suicide, of just kind of bringing that to the surface, especially from a parental perspective of, you know, I got to live for my kids, but what if that's not enough? So yeah, I would absolutely recommend checking this out. Again, such a surprise for me. So yeah, go give it a watch. Let me know what your thoughts are and if you enjoyed it, if it didn't live up to your expectations. I think, you know, going in this with an open mind to the idea of conversations around self-help, self-harm, all of these things, it's great to start to have that in cinema, especially in horror movies too. You know, I don't want it to take away, I think, from some of these stories that help us escape, but in this situation, it's done perfectly. So I don't really have too much else to say. So I hope you go watch this, go enjoy it, and agree with my thoughts or disagree. Either way, I would love to talk more about this movie. So yeah, thank you for listening and stay tuned for our next episode, our next review, which will be sooner than you think. Thank you as always for your support, and I will see you next time.